Well, good morning. Here it is, the last Sunday of September. Tell you, it's been some year, hasn't it? As we continue our study today, we're looking in Isaiah chapter 23, verses 8 through 18, and it's God reigns, R-E-I-G-N-S. God controls the rise and fall of nations and powers. Last week we were in chapter 7, and here we jumped all the way to chapter 23. Chapters 8 through 12 talks about the promised messianic kingdom of God coming in the future. We're talking about Jesus Christ and like that, and the fulfillment of the promise to David that his kingdom would last forever. And so it also talks about justice, or the judgments against those nations that are God had used to take his people into captivity. So we're jumping to chapter 23 right now. Now, chapter 13 through 23 is basically what they call the oracles against the nations, or judgments on the nations. And Isaiah lists several nations that God is calling judgment against. He's talking about Babylon, Syria, Philistia, Moab, Damascus and Israel, Ethiopia, Egypt, Edom, Arabia, and even Jerusalem. And these nations all have sinned against God. Like Babylon is the first one. They relied upon themselves and their idols, their self-made gods, to become a powerful nation. So they were relying upon themselves, their strength, their military strength, to get them by. Different nations, Assyria, the same thing. Whether it was either by military power, political power, or in the instance that we're looking at, chapter 23, the city of Tyre, T-Y-R-E, we're talking about the wealth. But all these nations had the same thing in common, is that there was no dependence or reliance upon God. It's strictly themselves, what they had, what they could do with themselves. And so as we go through and we see the chapters 13 through 23 talks about how God's judgment is coming upon these people, we come to the chapter 23, it talks about the nation or the city of Tyre. Now, Tyre, and we'll also talk about Sidon, S-I-D-O-N, they were sister cities. In fact, Sidon was the previous, or the main city, and Tyre became an offshoot of that. And due to their locations on the coast, the city itself was built on an island with a great fortress. And so they were thought very much impregnable, not be able to be conquered. But we see the power of Sidon and Tyre, specifically Tyre, has risen through the ranks to where they are known throughout the known world at that time as traders. They had great ships. If you remember from your history, the Phoenicians were great sailors. It talks in our lesson about the city of Tarshish. This was located on the coast of Spain, which was the edge of the world at that time. But Tyre and Tarshish, whether Tarshish was a settlement of Tyre is not made clear, but their ships interacted with each other. And so the Phoenicians were known as great sailors. In fact, they were one of the first ones, I won't say first, but if you remember, it talks about the Phoenician alphabet. So they were very well developed. They were known for their purple cloth. And of course, purple to that day and time resembled or was the equality of power, of prestige and stuff. And so they traded throughout the known world. They traded with Egypt, Tarshish, throughout the Mediterranean. And so they had become very powerful through their navy and through their wealth. And so God is saying, if you read verses 1 through 7, that their time has come and he's getting ready to punish them. Why? Because of their independence away from him, because of their greed, and because it's not the word, their pride, excuse me. They were full of themselves. And it was like, look what I've done. Look what I've accomplished. No credit given to God, none whatsoever. And if you take a minute and think about it, you know, I'm sure we have encountered people, and maybe even ourselves at times, say, look at what I've done. Well, look at what I've accomplished. But we need to realize that everything, all our ability, everything we have, God has given to us. The house that you live in and the job that you have and the car you drive. Yes, you worked, you earned money and bought this and everything. But the thing is, God has given you the ability. Everything belongs to God. And this is basically what he's trying to get across to the nations of the world. Yes, you have military power. Yes, you have wealth. But the thing is, I have allowed you to have that. It's through me you have accomplished these things. And so you need to recognize me as the one who has enabled you to do that. And these nations didn't. Neither did Tyre. And so what we have here is the condemnation of Tyre in our study, and the result from God's judgment. So let's look at verses 8 through 12. This is called God is Just, is the title of this. Isaiah 23, 8 through 12. Who planned this against Tyre, the bestower of crowns, whose traders are princes, whose merchants are the honored ones of the earth. Verse 9 and 10. The Lord of armies, or the Lord of hosts, planned it, to desecrate all its glorious beauty, to disgrace all the honored ones of the earth. Overflow your land like the Nile, daughter of Tarshish. There is no longer anything to restrain you. Verses 11 and 12. He, God, stretched out his hand over the sea, and he made kingdoms tremble. The Lord has commanded that the Canaanite fortress be destroyed. He said, you will not celebrate anymore. Ravished young woman, daughter of Sidon, get up, cross over to Cyprus. Even there you will have no rest. Let's go back. Verse 8. So the verses 1 through 7 is talking about what's coming to Tyre. And verse 8 says, who's doing this? Who has planned this? And he talks about the uniqueness of Tyre. Their merchants were honored among the people of the world. Everybody wanted to get in good with these merchants, so they would get a good deal. They would get trade with them. And so they were treated like royalty. I mean, they had it made. And so what he's saying is that the merchants of Tyre were looked upon as almost royalty because of the power that they had through their commerce. And so he said, whose merchants are the honored ones of the earth. People went out of their way to greet and treat these people spectacularly so they would be able to trade with them and have commerce. And, you know, I think things haven't changed that much. You have salesmen that go out of their way to brown nose, if you would, the clients to get their business. Same thing here. People went out of their way to be able to have ties with the city of Tyre and their commerce. Now we go to verse 9 and 10. The Lord of hosts, the Lord of the armies, planned it. Think about it. Almighty God said, okay, I've had it. This is enough. And it's not with this. I read several nations that God was coming and giving judgment to the people because of their lack of dependence upon Him, of worshiping Him, dependent upon their own self-reliance. And he says, you know, and He's going to desecrate all its glorious beauty, all the honored ones of the earth. So He's saying, you know, I'm going to ruin what you have put so much pride into. I'm going to eliminate and put into the trash heap all that you've built, all that you honored, all that you adored and loved. It's going to come to pass where it's going to be nothing. And verse 9 talks about overflow your land like the Nile, daughter of Tarshish. Now he's comparing Tyre to the daughter of Tarshish because they had in common the commerce, the trade. And so he's saying to the people, you know, there's going to be a time coming to where you need to get out of town. You need to leave. You need to flee. And he's comparing this to like the land of the Nile overflow. The Nile, where it is almost or around Egypt and stuff, is very arid, almost desert-like. But yearly, the Nile overflows and it brings this silt, this very rich soil from upstream, and covers the land with it, and makes the land around the Nile very exceptionally, very, very fertile. And so that's what he's saying. He says, like the Nile overflows, the people are going to overflow and try to escape, try to flee what the destruction that is coming to them. And so he's saying you need to, you know, there's going to come a time to where you're going to flee because of the impending invading forces. And they would flee the city in a bid to escape the capture or death. Now we go to verses 11 and 12. He talks about God stretched His hand over the seas and made the kingdoms tremble. Now, you got to remember, Tyre, how it was built, was on an island, great walls and everything. Almost, it looked like it'd be impregnable. And so what he's saying here is that as God goes around to these other nations and brings judgment upon them, the nations that have not been affected yet are trembling. And so he's saying when the city of Tyre is decimated and overrun, these other nations are going to sit up and say, whoa, wait a minute. If this could happen to that city on an island, fortified like tremendously, if that could happen to them, we could be next. And so they're scared. These nations are scared. They're taking notice. Hey, you know, God's working here. Nothing's stopping Him. We could be next, and that's scary. And so when it talks about the kingdoms tremble, that's what he's talking about. Isaiah's talking about that these nations are taking notice of what's happening, and they're saying, "Wow, am I next?" And then it goes on. The Lord has commanded that the Canaanite fortresses be destroyed. And so this goes back to when the Israelites were entering the Promised Land. God told them to wipe out the nation of the Canaanites, to destroy the land. And so this is what they're saying is that like the Canaanites, the Phoenicians are in store to be destroyed. Their cities to be destroyed. And then, excuse me, please. In verse 12, he said, "You will not celebrate anymore, ravished young woman, daughter of Sidon. Get up, cross over to Cyprus. Even there you will not have rest. You will have no rest." So what he's saying here in verse 12, Sidon was basically the first city of prominence. And they established Tyre. And Tyre eventually overcame in prominence and power to Sidon. But they were connected. They were both Phoenicians. They were both of a sailing group, of merchants and everything. And so when he talks about the daughter of Sidon, he's talking about Tyre. It says, you will not celebrate anymore. Tyre was known as a very carefree city. I mean, they had all the riches going for them. Life was nice. Everybody benefited. It was a happy place, if you would. And so he's saying that you're not going to have any reason to celebrate it anymore. And he talks about the ravished young woman. He's talking basically like a woman who has been raped and beaten. At one time, she was free and happy and gay. And now she has suffered this defeat, this personal anguish in her life. And so, you know, all the joy has gone out of her life. She's a spoiled, a wounded person through this, what is going to happen to Tyre and them being overrun and conquered. And so he's in the next verse, get up and cross over to Cyprus. In there you will have no rest. And so what he's saying, you can flee where you want, but you cannot escape God. My judgment is coming. No matter where you go, no matter where you hide, judgment is coming. And that's the final part. Now we go to the next section. Excuse me. This is called God is Active. This is verses 13 and 14 of chapter 23. It says, look at the land of the Chaldeans, a people who no longer exist. Assyria destined it for desert creatures. They set up their siege towers and stripped its palaces. They made it a ruin. Wail, W-A-I-L, wail made ships of Tarshish, because your fortress is destroyed. So what he's talking about here is the Chaldeans. They were a group of people that at one time had power, and the Assyrians took them over. These people lived in their main city was Babylon, and they were at one time powerful, but the Assyrians conquered them and overran them and basically became no more. They were grouped together eventually by the Assyrians, all these different groups and tribes and people and everything. But the Chaldeans itself were no longer. And so he's saying, look what happened to Chaldeans. They are no more. This is what's going to happen to Tyre. This is what's coming. And it's interesting because the Syrians, as I said, went around and grouped all these exiled or all these small parties of people who were once Chaldeans, some of them were, all these different tribes and everything, put them together. Eventually, they became Babylonians and overthrew Assyria. Think about that. And so, if you remember, the Babylonians, God used them to overtake Judah. And so, the thing is, these people, the Syrians, Babylonians, Egypt, all of them were great military powers. But God used them to bring judgment upon his own people. But in the end, these people themselves, the Babylonians, the Assyrians, were judged by God equally, just like they had used them to judge God's people. And so the idea here is that God is all-powerful. He uses who and what he needs to get his judgment done, to get his people in line, to bring them to their knees. Nothing can withstand the power of God. And it's strange how he uses these armies to get their people, his people's attention. But he still uses things in our lives today to get our attention, to bring us back to our knees, to our senses, back to him. And so this is what he's talking about, is that the Chaldeans were no more. They were once but now they're not. And this is what is in store for Tyre. And he talks about, verse 14, wail the ships of Tarshish, because your fortress is destroyed. So he's talking about the commerce between these two cities. Tyre is going to be, gone. No more will there be a port for these sailors from Tarshish to put into. No longer will they be safe in this harbor. It'll be gone. Now, little footnote, Tyre was besieged, I think, 5 times. One time by the Babylonians for 13 years. And they destroyed a lot of the area, but not Tyre. Now, in 332 BC, along comes Alexander the Great. He ended up finally demolishing, destroying the city of Tyre. And how he did that, with Tyre being on an island, he took all the rubble from the surrounding area that had been caused by conquering armies and filled in the water and made a way, a causeway to the island, to where they eventually, after 7 months siege, overcame and destroyed the city of Tyre. Now, this is in 332 BC. And after that, Tyre never came back to what it was. And so, even though we have a lot of time in between this, you need to realize that God said this would happen, and it did. Did it happen in Isaiah's time? No. It happened years and years and years later, but it happened. And that's what we need to understand, that when God says he's going to do something, he's going to do it. And it's in his time frame, not ours. And sometimes that's what's frustrating to us. We want it done. We want it done now. We want it done in the time span that we think it needs to be done. And that's not God's way. Sometimes it works out that way. We're fortunate. But other times, it's a growing process. And God uses that time to help us develop patience. I always remember what Sandy Hollingsworth used to say: be careful when you pray for patience, because you may have instances in your life to where your patience are really put on trial. So the thing is that we need to understand that God's time frame is not ours, and that we just need to wait on God. Period. The next part is God is honored. This is verses 15 to 18. Verses 15 and 16. On that day, he's talking about when Tyre falls. Now, it's not during Alexander's time. This is hard. I really get frustrated when I'm studying and I come up either in the lesson or in some of the commentaries that say there's a conflict here between experts of what this means. So the time frame is kind of iffy. It talks about on that day, Tyre will be forgotten for 70 years, the lifespan of one king. Now, they compare this to the average lifespan of a man at this time, the rule of a king, 70 years. They also compare this to the time that Judah had been conquered and was sent into exile for 70 years. But the thing is, exactly when this happened, we don't know. It's the 70 years basically is a symbolic time. 7 is the perfect number. And so 70 comes to be the perfect number of the time of judgment. And so that's what we'll go on. We're talking about 70 years. This is the expected time of perfect judgment for the city of Tyre. And so it would be forgotten for 70 years, the time for the justice to be carried out. And so at the end of the 70 years, 70 years, what the song says about the prostitute will happen to Tyre. Verse 16. Pick up your lyre, which is like a harp. Stroll through the city, you forgotten prostitute. Play skillfully, sing many a song, so that you will be remembered. Okay, this is kind of strange, but basically what they're talking about in these times, when a prostitute got past her time of being able to earn money on her looks and stuff, she would take to singing. And so what he's saying, he's comparing the city of Tyre to a prostitute, because basically that's what they did. They prostituted themselves to the world to gain monetary wealth and position. And so he's saying, Tyre, you're a prostitute, but you're forgotten. So what you need to do is try to bring as much attention to yourself as you can. Play skillfully, sing a song so that you will be remembered. And so the implication is that Tyre was after she suffered God's judgment, her former trading partners would no longer be interested in her. And so with the loss of her wealth, she would lose her power and influence. And so like a forgotten prostitute of the song, Tyre would have to do what she could to get a small portion of the attention she once had. And so what Isaiah is saying here is that after you've been judged, you're going to try to come back, and you're going to try to win back these people that once, fought for your attention. And that may seem strange. That's the best I can explain it. I mean, if the smart people can't get it together, where's that putting me? All right, verse 17, 18. I hope that doesn't confuse you too much. But basically it's saying that their prime is gone and they need to do what they can to survive. Verse 17, 18. At the end of the 70 years, the Lord will restore Tyre, and she will go back into business, prostituting herself with all the kingdoms of the world throughout the earth. Verse 18. But her profits and wages will be dedicated to the Lord. They will not be stored or saved, for her profit will go to those who live in the Lord's presence, to provide them with ample food and sacred clothing. Okay, again, we've got a place to where the intelligent, the pros, if you would, cannot come together exactly what this means. So this is the best I can do. So what he's saying, at the end of 70 years, Tyre is going to come back to his previous glory. Once again, they'll go back to business. Once again, they'll be prostituting themselves to the nations of the world. They'll be selling their goods and their wares and bringing business back in. But here's the difference. But their profits and wages will be dedicated to the Lord. Now, there is no clear-cut idea how this comes about. There's no stating that they were revival hit Tyre and people were converted. As far as I can see, there's no written verses that state this. But the thing is, we got to remember, it's God here. He's in control. He can do anything. And so the idea is that, once again, they were making profits and everything, but somehow, through the power of God, they are shifting some money toward God's work. Yes, they're making a profit. They're surviving. They're growing. Things are about the same. But instead of hoarding this money and saving it and building it up, God has found a way to channel this money to furnish his work to his people. It says that the people who live in God's presence, to provide them with ample food and sacred clothing, to provide them the means to survive through food and clothing so that they continue to do God's work. Now, how are we to understand this? The only thing I can say is that God is in control and he can do anything. Whether these people realized what was happening, we don't know. But the thing is, God had restored his kingdom back. They were, once again, a powerful nation or a powerful city. But he was able to divert their excess into supporting his people to spread the gospel. That's awesome. It's just, I don't know. I don't understand it. And evidently some of the experts don't either. But it comes down to, that's God. It's what it comes down to is that no matter how great a nation can get, they can't forget God. Every big nation, strong nation, has fallen from within. Yes, there's outside sources exerting pressure, but they came from within. And our nation isn't any different. We've got to be careful. We've got to turn back to God and put him in the forefront. Not a political party, not a person, not the wealth of this nation or their military power. We've got to put God first. And this is the reason these nations got judgment against them, because they were putting themselves first. They were putting their power, military power, their political power, their wealth, their handmade gods before the one true God, and judgment come upon him. You look around what's happening now. Is judgment coming upon us? It's scary, folks. All we can do is be sure that our personal lives are right with God, and to reach out to those that we know and love, and to help them ensure that their lives are right with God. It's easy sometimes to what's going on in this world to think, God, where are you? But God is here. God is in control. And that's what Isaiah is trying to get across. That through all these nations and everything, it's God who has control of everything. He can use anything or anybody to get his will and his work done, and he does. We need to be open and ready and available for him to use us. I need to be open and available for him to use me. Let's, in our prayer time, I hope you're praying for our nation. I hope you're praying for our world with this virus. And I hope you're praying for our nation, not only with the virus, but this harmony and the hate that's going on now that is just unreal to think of happening in this day and time. We need to pull our lives together under God, one nation under God. That's just not a second thought. That's what the forefathers did. One nation under God, indivisible, united under God. We can only do our best, and that's what we need to do to ensure that our nation stays indivisible under God. Let's do our part, and may God help us do our part. Let's pray. Dear God, as we study Isaiah, and dear Lord, I get into the situation, dear Lord, that with this thought and that thought, what to bring to the people who are listening. And I try to do my best to break it down to where I can understand it, and hopefully they can too. So dear God, just help me as I prepare for these lessons, to make it plain and clear what I feel that you're saying through your word. And dear God, I do pray for our nation. I pray for our world. Dear God, we're in such a world of hurt now. It's just overwhelming. But dear God, we just need to turn to you, to rely on you, and to promote you, to bring you to other people, to make them know that you exist, that you're in control, that you care and you love, and that you want them to be a child of yours. Help us, dear God, to spread that message. Help me, dear Lord, to be strong and to speak your truth. Dear God, be with us as we go through this coming week. Protect us. Keep us healthy, dear God. Bless us. And what we do this week, may it be pleasing to you. And dear God, how we love you so. Amen. God bless you all. Have a good week.